So, ladies and gentlemen, I have got the order to start the session 4 from this space conference, and we will talk about something which is entirely at the core of the theme of this event, namely benefits for citizens and society. We have a panel here around us who will discuss about oceans, environment and climate and the importance of space policy in this. Around me I have a panel of high-level experts to tell us more about their vision on the use of space technology in that field. And we have, first of all, the Commissioner who is directly involved in this. We have a member of the European Parliament who is very engaged in environment matters. We have leading people from some important agencies and from the European administration and, of course, captains of industry. I thank all of them to be present, and I would like to give them immediately the floor because time is running late and the Commissioner has to leave us at 15:30. First of all, I would like to thank Commissioner Connie Hedegaard to be here. She is responsible for the portfolio of climate action, and as Minister of Denmark and as Commissioner, she has certainly the experience to evaluate the needs for a European space policy. I am honoured to give her the floor immediately.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for the invitation to say a few words here in this distinguished panel. As you will know, climate change is a global phenomenon and its scale is planetary. Hence, space observations are an essential tool for climate policy, complementing research, land-based or sea-based research. It's no surprise, I believe, that it is today NASA, the American Space Agency, which is one of the most reliable providers of the long-term data on global temperatures. Time and again, you will have referred to in the international climate debate, NASA says this, NASA found this. It really shows that it's a crucial tool to have in your climate policies. It's also a relatively new tool. In Europe, the European Space Agency launched its climate change initiative last year that is monitoring 11 different impacts of climate change, like, for instance, sea level rise, sea ice, forest cover, etc. I'm sure that from other panelists we will hear more about the details of these things later in this panel. The Commission and ESA are also preparing to launch dedicated climate services under the Earth Observation Programme, GMS, in 2014. This programme will provide the data necessary to make annually updated worldwide land cover maps, helping to assess, for instance, deforestation more precisely. But already now, these satellites are monitoring atmospheric concentrations and fluxes of CO2, methane and aerosols. The international architecture for climate observations from space is still in full development. The United States, China, Russia and others are also developing their climate space programs. Some work is already being done on data standardization and climate quality control. But I believe that it is crucial that we continue coordinating our programs with others, that we exchange information, that we have a certain degree of coordination in order also to get the right data at the right time, in the right place, and at least cost. This is no matter only for individual countries or regions. We must pool our resources and capacities to get the best results for our climate policies. One example of successful cooperation between various European and American space agencies is the JASON Ocean mission. JASON is an altimeter spacecraft that revealed the recent steady rise in global sea level by about 3 centimeters a decade. Therefore, I am glad that the EU Galileo satellite navigation programme, of which the 2 first satellites were launched only 2 weeks ago, is compatible with the American GPS and the Russian GLONASS, because such cooperation in the field of climate must definitely be enhanced. The United Nations have a programme that defines what kind of data we precisely need for climate monitoring and policies. This includes concentrations of greenhouse gases, sea level rise, sea ice cover, land cover, ocean colour, etc. We must ensure that European space programmes, in cooperation with others, will be able to provide us with necessary information so that we can fit all the pieces of the puzzle together at a global scale. ESA and EUMETSAT are already global leaders in Earth observation. I read a study which says that both of them have today the potential to provide almost all the global satellite data we need to monitor the impacts of climate change, but they also called it an underused asset. An underused asset. I hope that soon ESA's climate change initiative and GMES will become important pillars of the global climate space observation system. Europe must ensure it remains at the forefront of these technologies. Space observations can also give valuable input for adapting our economies to the consequences of climate change. For instance, by providing information on vulnerabilities of different regions to temperature and precipitation changes. This can help us develop better policies, and of course it can also help us save money both in Europe and in projects we support in a number of developing countries. ESA satellites have, for instance, analysed hotspots in 10 European cities. On this basis, it is predicted that in the future, heat waves like the one we had in the extreme summer back in 2003 might reoccur every 3rd or 4th years. So satellite observations might help city planners to develop more livable cities, for instance, planning green spots, assess energy efficiency and assist civil protection authorities in taking adequate measures during heat waves. Input from satellite observations will also be used in the Commission's clearinghouse mechanism that we will introduce next March. It's an information tool for citizens and for policymakers and planners on adaptation to climate change, where you can be told exactly if you have a problem on adaptation, what is the best practice that others did, how can you use the best available technology or solution for your problem, and how can you do it at the most cost-efficient way. So also here, what we are talking of today could be a help, a very valuable help. Satellite observation should also provide us with the necessary data to attribute or not extreme events and climate trends to climate change, and to refine our climate models and projections. Space observations just for monitoring climate change may be quite costly, but synergies with practical applications in other sectors delivering immediate technological improvements are possible. Galileo will allow for better voyage planning in transport, shipping and aviation sector. This will at the same time help to reduce fuel costs and emissions. It will of course also save a lot of time if we were better to use the logistics there. Galileo can also be used for road charging systems, which can again help limiting emissions in and around our cities. And in agriculture, satellite observations can be helpful for farmers when they have to assess surface areas for subsidies under the Common Agricultural Policy, or when they spread pesticides, just to give a few examples. Finally, satellite technology needs to develop further before a full assessment of emissions and carbon sinks would be possible. Just to say, when we develop the next steps in our climate policies, we of course also look very much into what kind of assistance, what kind of information can we get through the space-generated tools. Just to end, our budget for future space observations is foreseen under the new European Programme for Research and Innovation, the so-called Horizon 2020. It will be presented by the Commission by the end of this month. The Commission requested in total €80 billion for the whole research and development program for the next budget period. And that is one of the very, very few areas where you will see a steep increase in where we propose to spend more money. And just to say also here, space is part of our discussions. So just in conclusion, observations from space for climate purposes, it is not just a nice to have, it is really a need to have. It can be an extremely valuable tool if we understand not only to develop it ourselves, but also to coordinate with other space agencies in other parts of the world. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your clear engagement for European space policy. And I will keep in mind you said Europe must remain in front of Earth observation. After hearing the Commissioner explaining her vision, let us listen to the voice of the European Parliament, who became, since the Lisbon Treaty, an important player in the space policy as well. Madame Corinne Lepage, vice-présidente de la Commission parlementaire de l'environnement, santé publique et sécurité alimentaire.
Corinne Lepage is the vice-chairwoman of the Committee on Environment, Public Health and Food Safety for the European Parliament. Could I ask you, are you happy with what you've heard from the Commissioner? And are people in Parliament aware of the importance of space policy? You have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, of course, I would welcome what Mrs. Hedegaard has said. These are difficult times, money is tight, and it's not always easy to justify heavy investments in space policy. But investing in space for oceans, environment and climate is not money wasted. It makes sense. The GMES system in particular is going to give us very important and precise data and figures, and it will be a major source of objective data, and that will lead to better decision taking. Now, with your permission, I'll dwell on oceans because I chair the intergroup on coastal regions, and therefore that's a point which is of particular interest to me. If you want to put in place sustainable marine development plans, then of course properly understanding oceans is very important. And 70% of the world's surface is of course covered by water, and apart from the economic activity which it brings, of course there are also further challenges, climate challenges at stake. And I think trends in the oceans and the effect that has on climate is very important. And we need to understand how air, earth and oceans interact and how that ties in with the carbon cycle, which is also something which is of interest to us. Having this kind of service at European level is useful in keeping tabs on the oceans, the water quality, temperature and so on, but also to look at climate disasters or natural disasters. There was a problem with the oil rig and, for example, the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, and all of that was prompted by waterborne problems. So surveillance can allow us to better inform our citizens about the impact of these natural disasters and to some extent predict how trends will develop. And of course, we need to make sure that what we create is available to everyone. We shouldn't have new inequalities, so this should also be available to the local communities. We can also establish risk areas for fishing efforts through this information, and the Commissioner of course knows better than I do that currently the fisheries policy is being reviewed, so all of that information can feed into that as well. And we need to make sure that there is a level playing field. Currently, the countries that are more technologically developed have this information available, and of course natural disasters and climatic disasters have an impact on all of us, so we need to make sure that this is available to all of us. And with Clean Sea Net, we will have a satellite-based service in place which is free of charge and can serve for our citizens and can allow us to, for example, detect oil spills through radar satellite imaging. And I think Parliament and Council, in their discussions, will have to bear in mind that this is a very important issue. Thirdly, the GMES programme could be broadened to cover other environmental and climatic issues. The Commissioner said a word about that just now. And we could put in place further infrastructure and services which allows us to keep tabs on CO2 emissions and greenhouse emissions. Energy prices, of course, are going up, so it would be a timely event if we could put such a system in place and if this could contribute to us keeping our international commitments. And of course, having clear data and figures would also allow us to avoid any discussions as to whether those figures are reliable or not. My last point I would make is that, of course, under the multi-annual financial framework, we need to make sure that resources are available. We need to make sure that information is available to the member states so that they can take the right decisions to the benefit of the environment and the climate. GMES needs to be financed properly through the EU's budget, and we need to make sure that GMES can continue to provide us with the services of general interest. We can play a major role when it comes to space policy. So space policy and its instruments should be given more independence, and that way we can promote innovation and make sure that all of this feeds into our work.
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you, Mrs. Lepage. From what you've said, the Parliament, GMES needs community financing. That was your message.
From, may I say, political level, let's go to the the fields itself. First of all, we have Volker Liebig, Director of Earth Observation Programs of the European Space Agency. Mr. Liebig, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, dear parliamentarians, this session is on ocean environment and climate, and if we look into the news and in the newspapers of the last days, we see that there are some extreme weather events in the northern Mediterranean which hit France and Italy with inundations, landslides and heavy rainfalls and storm. It was even reported in TV, I saw this by chance yesterday morning, that for the first time in history it seems that the US Hurricane Center has discussed whether this storm should be regarded as something which never happened in this area. So we see our environment is changing, and all climate predictions I know also predict that extreme weather events will become almost a normal case all over the planet. If we look into, I should also say in this context, not to forget it, that by these events also a GMES service was called. We have one service which is called SAVER, which is to respond on disasters, which is one of the very important activities in GMES prepared. And because the help forces need to understand what is the situation at the moment, and satellites give you a very fast overview of that. So here we have direct involvement of the future GMES system based on the infrastructure we have at the moment. And I have learned from my colleague and friend Alain Ratier from EUMETSAT, and I'm sure he will also a bit elaborate on that, that the yearly damages by inundations in Europe come up to 4 billion euros per year, and the damages by storms to 2.6 billion. So we speak about really high figures. If we look a bit further, climate is another issue of this session. I have to say if I observe what we get back from our satellite measurements, but also in situ, for example, from the Arctic region, shows that dramatic developments are ongoing there, which will influence all of us to a certain extent. I had the possibility to be in Greenland this year, and I have to say, here we see a very, very strong mobilization of the glaciers in calving, which is very likely due to the warm water which comes from the bottom and mobilizes the glaciers. And we have seen many publications since the last report of the International Panel for Climate Change, predicting a much higher contribution of, for example, the Greenland ice melting to sea level rise than it was foreseen so far. So I'm sure the next assessment report after 2007 report will include many recent satellite observations and in situ findings which were not included so far and will lead to completely new figures. We also learn, of course, that this system is much more complicated than we thought, because sea level rise is not uniform. It's distributed, and unfortunately it seems that the poorest nations who are closer to the equator will be hit more than the ones here in the north, because when Greenland is melting, then the attraction, the gravity attraction of this ice mass to the water will first be reduced, and so the water flows a bit more to the equator. So you see, we have very complex global environmental and climate issues which we have to monitor. It is an economic impact. I already mentioned some numbers concerning flooding and storms, but we know, not at least since the Stern report, that climate change is an economic issue. I would even go a step further to keep with this example of the Arctic. It can also open business areas, because the transport via the poles or increased fishery, not to forget resources to which there might be access, will also change a bit the economy, not only in the Scandinavian country, if I look only to Europe, but it will have an influence to all of us. Satellite data are absolutely vital to tackle the broad range of challenges ahead, and if you look into the last months, we have seen from Haiti to China, from Fukushima to the Hurricane Irene, we have seen events which needed support by satellite data. We have become more conscious, I think, about the connection between us, our lifestyle, and the planning of our future and the environment, and climate as habitat also of our life. I'm in general very pleased that Europe takes a leading role in this whole discussion, climate, but also in terms of what we prepare for satellite infrastructure for the future. ESA delivers since more than 20 years satellite data, but based on scientific satellites, and some of them are starting to retire. We have one of our workhorses. We have started the deorbiting after 16 years, IRIS-2, some months ago, so this data source is not available anymore. Envisat is still in orbit, but will retire latest in 2013 or 14. We hope we can keep it alive until we have the Sentinels in orbit. And this also shows that we have a certain timeline to follow for GMES, because Sentinels are part of GMES. We have in Europe already invested 3 billion for the development of the services and the infrastructure of GMES. And GMS is largely within cost and time schedule. So we are maybe 6 months behind the original schedule, which is for such a huge infrastructure project, I think, a very, very good value. And we are today in a situation where we now look forward. We have operational budgets for GMES from inside the EU budget, interesting enough, for the first year of operation. but we have the discussion, as you have heard this morning and before probably, that the budget for the operational phase of GMES, which, and allow me to say this as a footnote, does not include any development risks anymore, because the development risk comes during the development time, which we have covered financially, which is funding for this phase. With GMES, I think Europe has a unique project. Nobody in the world is planning to make the step we have in front of us, which resembles a bit what we have done 35 years for metrology, when the satellite-based metrology started, to observe environment and also deliver civil security services from a real operational system. I would like to finish this pointing on this little sheet I found on my table when I came in, which has the headline, "Can the EU afford to operate blindly in a globalized world?" And I'm very confident and optimistic that the answer to this will be no, and this means that the operational budgets for GMES have to be within the next multi-annual financial framework. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Liebig. It was very clear, your message. Now, as indicated in the program, we should have Bernard Vries from Maritime Affairs in the European Commission, but at the very last moment, he could not come, and we are very glad that Ian Shepherd from his service will give the speech. Mr. Shepherd, you have the floor.
Okay. Mr. Vries is very sorry that he couldn't take part. Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving back to the sea, and the marine economy is growing. As land and water resources become more scarce, we're looking to the 71% of the planet that's ocean to deliver food, energy, materials and medicines that we need to give a decent and sustainable standard of living to the 7 billion people that live on this planet. But as we move back to the sea, we're facing challenges that are different to those on land. And even though they're obvious, they're worth repeating. We can't navigate by landmarks because there aren't any. We can't connect to the mobile phone network because there isn't one that reaches that far. And we can't observe what's going on because there's nobody there to observe it. Therefore, even more than the terrestrial economy, the marine and maritime economies rely on Earth-orbiting satellites for navigation, communication and observation. And even more than the terrestrial economy, any deficiencies in the EU's space infrastructure are going to hold back these new opportunities for blue growth. And this is why those of us who are concerned with developing and implementing the EU's maritime policy look at the EU space policy with great interest. I'd like to make 3 points. First of all, the EU needs to ensure that Galileo and GMES Sentinel satellites are launched on schedule. This has already probably been repeated many times, and probably other speakers will say this, so I don't need to say any more. Secondly, we need to ensure that entrepreneurs and small businesses, academics, students can access the data from these satellites on a reasonable basis. I think everybody accepts that this must be the case for Galileo. GPS has demonstrated that accurate and readily available positioning data can spawn large and profitable downstream industries. And Galileo's is Europe's insurance policy to ensure continuity of service should anything, for whatever reason, happen to GPS. The same needs to be true for GMES. Some point to the huge public investments that have been made in GMES and indicate that it would be nice to recoup some of these investments by selling the data, but this would be a mistake. We've seen many interesting services developed and demonstrated through EU research programmes based on publicly owned satellite data that have collapsed once the EU funding finished. It was impossible to build an operational service that anybody would use if they had to pay for their data. It's economically short-sighted for the taxpayer to invest in expensive satellites and to limit the use of these data. In other words, public investment to encourage innovation is better spent in providing the means by which companies innovate rather than trying to force innovation along predetermined paths. The third point, we need to drive down costs. The days when nobody watched how the EU spent its money are over. Encouraging more competition, private investment and risk-taking in space will help us get more for the same money. And it's already beginning. Within the Directorate General for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, we've used commercial services to provide signals from ships' automatic identification systems captured by satellites to trace and track ships suspected of illegal fishing activities through the Panama Canal, across the Atlantic to the Canaries. I could say a lot more about space and the oceans, but a lot of it's already been said by my colleagues here. Of course, it's obvious that oceans are the primary influence on the climate, and it's obvious that we need to monitor the ocean to determine the climate. But other people have said this. But I think my time's up, so I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd, for being here, and I will keep in mind your message that it will be a mistake to sell the data of GMES. Let us now listen to another important key player, namely Professor Jacqueline McGlade, Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. Ms. McGlade, first of all, could you give us a brief outline of the role of your agency, and maybe you can tell us why you need GMS as well.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know, the agency is based in Copenhagen. We are established to try to deliver relevant, timely information, not only on the environment per se, but on the sectors and the way in which society influences the environment. We have been built up around the idea of observing, of sharing information, and that has really, up until now, been very much earthbound. We've had tremendous investments in monitoring systems to look after air quality, water quality, and so on. But we enter a new era. Thomas Friedman has announced, in a sense, that we have entered an era of hyperconnectivity. And it is quite clear that the insatiable appetite that the public has for information can now only be met by having what we would consider near real-time information. The past is the past. The future is what people are interested in, and they want to react almost simultaneously as events are happening. So we have really had to change our business model. We have worked in the last 5 years on the basis that GMES products and services need to become part of the day job of the environment agencies across Europe and across all our member countries, from Greenland to Turkey, and from our work in the neighbourhood now, including Russia, the Stans, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and North Africa. So on a daily basis, we work with nearly 73 countries, and I say nearly because, of course, it includes Kosovo, but we genuinely see this appetite for jumping into a new technology, into a new way of communicating, not only with politicians, but also with the public about the state of the environment. And what is key to that, of course, are Earth observations. Now, how does that really read out in practical ways? Those of you who know the agency will be aware that we have taken on a role to coordinate the in situ elements of what is needed to link, in a sense, the information coming from the Sentinels, from the existing platforms, to these large-scale observing programs, the Argo buoys, out in the ocean, measuring through the ocean depths, not just the surface, reporting back, in a sense, what the temperature profile looks like, and then connecting with what we see as the sea surface temperature, giving a much better input into the global climate models, telling us how the oceans themselves are absorbing temperature at depth, and giving us, in a sense, the idea that the signal that we see in the climate, in the atmosphere, has got a 1,000-year time lag built into the oceans. We've seen on land how connecting land cover, land use change, has fundamentally altered the way in which we now view biodiversity, recognising that building roads, infrastructure, urban areas have genuinely compromised biodiversity, not because of simply putting cement down, but actually fragmenting our landscape. And that picture of Europe, the fragmentation, has only been possible because of the satellite imaging coming through. And it has led to a genuine appreciation, I think, within the regional perspectives, the regional policies in Europe, that we need to do more about how we have regional investment, certainly around our transport sector. So the day job has changed because we now become, in a way, a large data processing organisation on behalf of the member countries to produce quality-assured European reference layer data. Where do the flows go? Where do the large events occur? Where are the hotspots in Europe? These are all things that member countries now need because, as we virtually know every day, the urgency with which we need to respond to climate change and, of course, other aspects of the environment is just not going away. So it's not good enough, though, for it to sit within the agency. And so we've worked in the last 4 years with pretty much all the major players in the IT industry to say we now need to connect citizens, 490 million citizens in Europe, 870 million people across Russia, the Stans, and within the UNECE setting, to connect them to a reasonable level of access to satellite imaging and to make that fit for purpose in what is otherwise a local service. We intend in December at a summit in Abu Dhabi called Eye on Earth. It's a large global summit with world leaders and others, business leaders, to launch a global public service called Eye on Earth. It will be free and it will facilitate for the very first time all of the software companies, all of the proprietary software, all the open source community to come together and to make it possible for users to create their own, so to speak, home setting in which they can look at satellite information, information on the environment, roads, the cadastre, the mapping, and essentially create their own understanding of how the world is changing around them. It's a phenomenal step forward in terms of the business world, because for once we are not going to be paying large licenses. But what it suggests to me is, why has it happened? And I come back to the last point. We can make plenty of services in GMES, but what we can't do is build up the trust within our kind of communities, within citizens, within the research community, if at any moment those services can be turned off. And so it's about sustaining the information sources. It's about sustaining the connectivity of the satellite input together with people, together with in situ observations. So that's what our agency is doing, working from mapping agencies around the world, together with those who are trying to deliver policies, and in the end, trying to equip citizens with the ability to actually support an improved environment through their own behavioural changes. So I welcome you to not only look at the work of the agency within GEO, within GMES and within the in situ area, but also to join us looking at Eye on Earth and basically having a go at trying to put together your own satellite service for whatever purposes you would like. And I would welcome that in the middle of December. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McGlade. Now we go to EUMETSAT and to the Director General since the 1st of August, Mr. Alain Ratier. Congratulations, Mr. Ratier, for your appointment. You have the floor.
Thank you. Let me first say a few words about EUMETSAT. We are an intergovernmental organization with 26 member states, and hopefully soon we will have 31. And our mandate is to establish, operational systems of meteorological satellites. And in 2000, our mandate was expanded to climate monitoring, perhaps anticipating the synergisms that Commissioner Hedegaard has called for in her introductory talk. So we are operating a series of satellites, the first one being developed by ESA, for typically 15 years. This is what we call an operational service, and among those, JSON, which provide critical climate information. So during the previous sessions, a number of people have stressed that GMES is about services. And let's forget one moment the satellites, and I wish to address a bit the vision of the ocean and atmosphere services. In fact, there are a lot of similarities with meteorology. And I'm talking about air quality, ocean monitoring, and so on. So the first similarity is the structure of the value-adding chain. We are talking about diagnostic of the state of the atmospheric composition, of the state of the ocean, based mainly but not only on observations. We are talking about forecasts, because the atmosphere and the ocean are in motion. And in the end, we are talking about providing information in support of decision-making, private or public, and benefits come from the decisions actually made. So this is the value-adding chain from the Met services, but this is also the same type of value chain which we will have for air quality prediction and also for ocean prediction and monitoring. And we shall not forget forecasts. I heard this morning Vice President Tajani talking about the floods in Italy. One should not forget that if the civil protection is in action at the right place, this is because they had the right meteorological forecasts. And it saves a lot of lives and avoid costs. So the second similarity with meteorology is the type of information system that you need to implement to provide the GMES ocean and atmosphere services. We're talking about observations, including space observations, and I will come back to that. But we're also talking about numerical simulation model, numerical prediction model, and last but not least, decision support systems, swallowing this information to provide direct support to decision making. And what is important to realize is that progress delivery to the citizens requires innovation all along this value-adding chain. The other important similarity with meteorology is the need to address a cascade of time and space scale. We need to address global, continental, regional, local scales. And to address the local scale, you need to address the global, the continental, and the regional scale. This is due to science, but it is also the ambition of GMES. And of course, it applies also to climate. So, and you can give examples, for instance, also stressing the importance of prediction. If you take air quality, if you take the large fire we had in Russia in the summer 2010, the question was about the extent of the related pollution. And satellites told us the story. But then you did a model to see whether this pollution reaches Europe, Finland, and others. So if you are interested in coastal prediction, you need first to predict the currents. If you have a marine pollution event, you need not only to know where the pollution is from imagery, but you need also to predict where it goes and which part of the coast it will hit. And here, the ocean models play a key role, and they need data as input to provide the right forecast. So, and there could be many other examples. Corinne Lepage talked about the Gulf of Mexico, the oil rig. At some point, there was one question about the pollution going into the Atlantic. And the answer was given by the My Ocean Service and their GMES. Yes, we knew that we had a bit of time before it goes into the Atlantic. Then biology played its role, which was a surprise, but a good one. So the last similarity is that you need to establish basic services to create benefits to the citizens, but also opportunities for the service providers. You know, if I take another example, in the US you have a lot of harbor management systems which providing prediction for sea level, for all the conditions to support the traffic in an harbor. So, and this again is connected to regional and large-scale models. So the vision in the end is probably relatively simple to express. For this type of services, we need a multi-scale observation and prediction system. And the question now is about satellites and where we are on this road. So satellites are indispensable, first of all, to address the variety of scales that we need to address, but they are necessary, and Jacqueline McDade was very clear about it, in synergism with other observing systems. We need also long-term perspective to develop services, so we need operational or long-term satellite systems. So where are we? Not so bad, actually, and Volker Jebisch was very clear. The satellites, we have already the meteorological satellites. We need to continue those, but we have also the GMES missions, which have been developed, which are ready for launch and for operations. And we have also the services based on complex modeling. We have MyOcean, we have MAC, so we definitely are ready. The development is completed, Europe is ready, and it's time for benefit. So it's time to be consistent and to be in a position to draw the benefits from past investment. So let me conclude addressing governments and the possible role of EUMETSAT. As I told you in the beginning, EUMETSAT is an operational agency. We are delivering data services. We are business neutral. It means we are not involved in applications. We deliver to the service providers, and our Council agreed that we should deliver our data to the GMES service providers. We've been designated as the operator of the Sentinel-3, the ocean and the atmospheric GMES missions. And, by the way, S4 is an instrument flown on our satellites. So we are ready to play the role of this operator. And as we are simple-minded people, maybe, we believe that the governance should be simple. And we believe that service-level agreement should be perhaps a good solution, and we would be ready to have a service-level agreement with the EC to operate these missions and to deliver data to the service providers and the user community at large. This is what we've done for meteorology, and it's been a success story for 25 years, as you know, so why not continue? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We switch now to the other side of our table where we have the industry and service providers. And here also we have some very distinguished speakers from European flagships in space. With first of all, Joël Chenet, Senior Vice President, Institutional Affairs and Business Development of Thales. Then we listen to Alain Boris, Senior Vice President, Strategy and Business Development of OHB, Jerry Delamare, Account Director of T-Systems International, and then Stefan Israel, Vice President, GMES and European Institutional Business and GEO Information Service of Astrium. Let's start first with Mr. Chenet of Thales.
Thank you, Mr. President. I promise I will be short. Okay. Just a few words. I remember a long time ago there were the Landsat images that were the first one, and I remember that at that time we were sending people on the field just to watch and verifying the reality of the information. So that was a long time ago. Today, everyone has used Google View one day or another, or will do very soon. The evolution of observation satellite and the adaptation of the industry has followed the trend of our life concern, from what is possible to what is needed. The pioneering activities in Europe were related to SPOT 30 years ago, and the main application at that time was foreseen in agricultural management. Today, there are little results for SPOT in that field. At the same time, meteorology and oceanography were pushed by technology. It was so nice to do images from geostationary orbit, or to measure ocean at 1 centimeter precision. But doing so has authorized to assimilate the data in the simulation model and then to define the best set of data to improve the forecast. And that's the way that we have defined the second generation. So we have moved from techno-push to user-driven pull. Maybe you all know the old French sentence, le soleil ne se couche jamais sur les territoires français.
The sun never sets on the French territories.
Need to know that the sun is always high over the European maritime interest zone. And space is the only mean that could provide a global view over the free ocean. We have put in orbit some satellites that are useful for maritime management. The first one to consider are the telecom satellite. My colleague from Inmarsat just before has given all the benefits that you could have from SATCOM on the maritime application and for the sailors. But you need also to take into account the data from the MERIS instrument, for example, that have been used for fishery, for fish management, but also the Argos data that are used to help fishery and to know what are the illegal fishing. But maybe we need to consider that maritime surveillance could be improved, and we need to use the AIS receiver, the radar and optical images to build a maritime surveillance system. Such a system is really in the reach of Europe. Based on this experience and all the data collected by Envisat and ERS 1 and 2, GMES has been defined as the second generation program for environmental monitoring and management. Have we, at the same time, developed all the tools to do the forecast and data assimilation, the analysis, which were the success driver for meteo and oceanography? In fact, in a large sense, the answer is yes. Now we are waiting for the success of GMES, the main condition being continuity of data and commitment on the long run for this data. What is the right model for such a continuity? Observation data, like those provided by Sentinel-1 and 2, are today in the hands of private operators. So GMES program need to take care not to compete through a free access policy against this operator, but to support them and even, why not, to give them the responsibility to operate the Sentinels. For the other Sentinels related to ocean and atmosphere, obviously the operator is EUMETSAT. At the same time, Europe has a huge responsibility and a big chance to create a real network to monitor the carbon cycle. We have the best scientists in the world, in Europe. We have all the means on that, for this topic, and we have all the capabilities. So Europe now only needs to decide and to organize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chenet, for this message. The floor is now for Mr. Boris from OHB.
Dankeschön. As an introduction and to follow the remarks of the Commissioner on climate change, I would like to stress the urgency to have a global carbon monitoring system. In fact, it is widely understood that international political action is needed to avoid reaching a potential, can be called a climate tipping point around 2050. But the Kyoto Protocol expires in 2012, and the Copenhagen Summit failed to achieve a new agreement. There are, of course, several reasons for this failure, but one of the key factors to obtain an international agreement was missing, and namely a transparent, independent, and I would say non-biased verification tool. in order to monitor the carbon emissions. And I would summarize that by saying that objective evidence is required for policy making. To quote the Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, in Cancun, a global carbon observing system is needed for delivering information to guide political discussions of the need to take difficult decisions on agreement among countries. In this respect, space infrastructure has the strong advantage to be global and transparent, as there cannot be a suspicion that a country modifies the information for its own interests, as could have been the case for ground-based measurements. You will be able to see a small movie to illustrate that during my speech. I hope it will work. We'll see. It's a silent movie, so I can continue. According to the Geo-Carbon Strategy expressed by the GEO, the Group on Earth Observation, put in place by the 2002 World Summit on Sustainable Development and by the G8, an integrated global carbon observing system is needed by 2015. They also stated that the next generation of greenhouse gases satellite measurements need to provide high accuracy measurements with high spatial resolution, around 1 to 2 kilometers, in order to minimize the cloud contamination. And that a 1 to 3 day repeat frequency is needed to get good monthly mean greenhouse gases fields. However, today, none of current or planned satellite missions achieve these specifications. That is why the GEO stated that the highest short-term priority is to continue space-based CO2 and CH4 methane measurements with improved passive sensors, ideally in a satellite constellation. In fact, the feasibility of greenhouse gases measurement from space has already been demonstrated by the Skiamaki instrument, which is on board the Envisat satellite from ESA. We therefore propose to base the concept for a carbon monitoring constellation, which we call CarbonSat, on the experience gained from Skiamaki. The time constraints, the urgency, calls also for the use of state-of-the-art and off-the-shelf technologies as far as possible, and that is the reason why a team led by the University of Bremen launched airborne campaigns to demonstrate how this approach is able to monitor and to verify transparently the point source emissions. The concept is now further elaborated in the ESA CarbonSat study, which is part of the Earth Explorer program. Clearly, the advantage of a satellite constellation is to be able to deliver global daily CO2 and CH4 measurements with a spatial resolution of less than 2 kilometers and adequate accuracy. With 5 satellites, as you saw in the small movie, we can cover 2,500 kilometers on ground in one orbit. This leads to a global coverage every day. It will provide the urgently needed information. First, it will improve our understanding of the CO2 and CH4 man-made and natural sources and the CO2 sinks for better attribution and prediction of climate change. And second, it will provide reliable and timely, what Mrs. McGlade called near real-time, global monitoring and reporting of the surface emissions of greenhouse gases from strong local sources such as power plants, urban areas. And this will yield the contribution of man-made emissions to be monitored, assessed and attributed. And this in order to support a transparent, objective and independent verification of the reporting to the UNFCCC. This will support also post-Kyoto Treaty negotiations, just by the ability to verify treaty obligations. To implement such a system is a political responsibility of the European Union as a forerunner of worldwide climate change initiatives, with programs such as the ECCP, the European Climate Change Programme. It will indeed serve several political needs, such as the long-term life preservation on Earth, the political stability to avoid the problems and burdens due to potential migration, which could be caused by climate change. It will also provide early strategic information for the EU to guide the development of global economy and environment policy and legislation by having inside understanding in advance about the greenhouse gases emissions and having thus a significant advantage in the international negotiations. And this can also bring an economic advantage for European industry by enabling a fair competition for European manufacturers in the export market, as currently European industries are subject to heavy emission control, which adds in extra costs, while some of their competitors do not incur these costs in countries which do not implement any control on emissions. As a conclusion, I would summarize by saying that a satellite constellation is a global, non-intrusive, independent, transparent and operational answer to be able to monitor CO2 and CH4, man-made and natural emissions. It is the adequate tool to help on reaching an international agreement and its consequent enforcement. It will also provide the strategic information at the earliest possible time for the EU to guide and influence the development of global economy and the national, European and international environment policy and legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Hedegaard has to leave us now, unfortunately, because she has an urgent meeting. But before she goes, she would give us some conclusions of what she had already heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I have to leave, but it has been extremely interesting to hear the presentations so far. I will still have some people in the room that will also report back what we hear during the next few interventions. But just to say, it's very clear, I think, that we share the view why this is important. And I also thought it was very poignant in what Mr. Boris said about the science-based approach we need for climate policies in Europe. One of the sort of strangest things in the whole climate debate is when you meet people who are denying that anything is taking place. And I think the only way to get rid of that, and that is necessary in order to get the international decision power that we need behind climate policies, the only way to get to that point is through more knowledge, more facts. The more knowledge we have, the more science-based we can be, and the better we can enforce climate policies, and the mutual credibility in backing up the policies that we agree on, the better seen from a climate perspective. So I'm looking forward very much to much of the work going on, and I'm sure that we can make good allies here in how to pursue this agenda. I think it's clear that the Commission has given quite a priority to this space thing. I'm also sure, and the members of the Parliament will know what I'm talking about, that it's going to be contested and debated when we have the next budget discussions with Member States and with Parliament, but it's clear that this will not come out of nothing. It only comes if we want to make it a priority. So there's been an extremely interesting session here. Thank you for all the information. I hope we can stay in contact between the Commission services and also the different institutions represented here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
So thank you, Commissioner. We go further now with Joré de la Mare of T-Systems.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to share with you some thoughts on how we, T-Systems, as part of Deutsche Telekom, can share some examples why GMES services are very important also to the telecoms industry sector, and how we may shine some light in times of economic crisis by creating new opportunities out of that. You have heard some examples from the speakers already. From our perspective, very important is that for future use of space data, we will be able to connect these data to every person, every citizen for his normal daily life and work. We believe in innovation through the combination of the space data with other information in an intelligent way to speed up decisions, enable more efficient processes. Hence, space data should become available everywhere, anytime, as Commissioner Hedegaard has also pointed out. This means availability in terms of networks, but also comfort for the end user to select his appropriate services. And if we then look back at some of the presentations in these sessions and understanding the enormous complexity and volumes of space data, I think it will become clear it is not a trivial task to do. To manage that challenge, we have to ensure the desired information can be extracted from the vast information available in an easy way and in real time, as stated before. As an example of such a service, we are, under the contract of the European Commission, developing a pilot project together with partners GAF and DLR, the German Aerospace Center, to pilot a service for air quality called Observe. Based on the vast space and sensor data available on air quality and the complex scientific models for forecasting, the objective is to provide the first EU-wide air quality index and forecasting service, simply as a mobile app. Similar, you could say, to a weather report or a forecast that we all already have on our mobile phones today. Based on experience made in several major cities around Europe and the feedback from citizens and companies, we believe such services will help to set up new services for companies when planning travel or outdoors event, but first and foremost, of course, help citizens understand better the impacts of air pollution and air quality. And that public awareness is increasingly being more important, we can see from our web business. The portal Feel Green, that is addressing a sustainable lifestyle, was launched by Deutsche Telekom in September 2011. And already in the first months, we achieved almost 2 million visitors. In other projects, we are planning to develop similar services. Also for industry, not just for citizens. For example, water management, water quality monitoring, deforestation, precision farming, some of the key areas. Every single project is providing new opportunities for the challenges we face in the world, some of them being mentioned before, like the carbon dioxide, but also the simple aspect of growing population. The mentioned projects demonstrate clearly the need for a powerful and efficient infrastructure. We strongly believe that the use of cloud computing technologies will support this future GMS dynamic services we need. Cloud computing is not just a buzzword today, but has already developed into a mature platform long before media awareness started. Today, already more than 500 clients in industry use, for example, our private cloud services to run developer systems, highly dynamic production environments, or to convert and archive digital company libraries. Use of cloud computing will enable new services, especially those needed only for a certain period of time. You pay as you use them. Other promising technologies becoming available from IT industry that could help in this area are big data and in-memory processing. Things that will really change the way how we can evaluate in a very short time extremely large data sets like space data. We appreciate very much the effort of the European Commission puts into the development of cloud services for Europe, and we support very much the approach to underline the advantages that European cloud services offer compared to other solutions. As concrete examples for cloud services in the space sector, we are planning cloud-based approaches to several areas of space data reprocessing and validation, and also in partnership with several agencies to study the geohazards in the world, and hopefully to turn it into a global service covering all relevant sites and events in the world. With cloud computing, we believe such services might become feasible over a very short period of time. Lastly, it's important also to continuously foster innovation and actively search for new applications. Innovations are driven by ideas. For this, we are very pleased that under the lead of ESA and managed by the German Anwendungszentrum in Oberpfaffenhofen, we were able to launch the GMES Masters Ideas Competition for the first time in 2011. The competition follows in the footsteps of the successful Galileo Masters. And in this year, more than 100 new GMES applications were submitted, qualified, and awarded in 5 different categories. The overall winner, Earth Watchers from the Netherlands, for example, empowers citizens in rainforest monitoring, providing a mass analysis tool for space data that each user can use for himself, and combine that with validation by local teams, and linking that in an intelligent way to available social media, like the ones we know from daily life, Facebook and the others. Another company, EarthCast from Canada, was the winner of the GMES Cloud Computing Challenge, which was awarded by T-Systems. It plans to provide live streaming of HD video from space by mounting cameras on the ISS. It will be very interesting to find out also how such data can complement the traditional satellite imaging, and this example shows the potential relevance of space data when we make intelligent use of cloud computing. Therefore, the long-term support of the European institutions for the GMES program, in our view, therefore, is very important to develop sustainable services and make new opportunities available in industry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Stefan Israel of Astrium. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to use this opportunity to briefly highlight how existing and ready-to-use space-based services, I insist on that, existing and ready-to-use space-based services can contribute to addressing global environmental issues. First of all, let me remind you that Astrium and industry are key players for GMES services. GEO, which is the Earth Observation Division of Astrium Services. It is the merger of former Spot and Infotera entities. So GEO is currently the coordinator of 2 GMES pre-operational services. SAFER, dealing with emergency management, and you know that this service is currently activated for inundation and flood in France and in Italy. This service has a 24/7 capacity, and it has proven to be very efficient for 3 years. And the second one, which is GeoLand 2, dealing with land management. Astrium works here with 2 consortia of more than 50 public and private partners. I want to insist on that because here we see that large space companies and geoinformation SMEs are fully complementary. These 2 services are now entering into their initial operational phase. As all GMES stakeholders, and after years of co-investment, Astrium hopes that GMES will be back in the next EU budget. And to be honest, the sooner will be the better. Industry needs visibility. Let me speak now about climate change. Climate change should be one of the 6 core services of GMES commencing in 2014. I don't think it is necessary to insist on what is at stake there. It's just about our future. Public and scientific bodies will for sure have a key role in this service. Nevertheless, there are specific areas where industry could deliver a fully operational and efficient service in the framework of the climate change service. As an example, to better understand climate change, the future service will deal with a huge amount of space and non-space data. Industry has significant capacities in data management. As an example, Astrium and the UK Space Agency are now considering co-investing in a new climate and environmental monitoring facility located in Harwell in the UK, and this centre should have the capacity to deal with such space and non-space data. Second, and I will insist more on this second example, it is about forest monitoring. You know that forest monitoring will be decisive to mitigate climate change. Land use change, of which deforestation is the main driver, amounts to about 20% of the total anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gas. Information based on space assets is at the appropriate scale to establish a baseline over the past decades and then to monitor deforestation permanently in the future. This information is absolutely mandatory to trigger the so-called REDD financial mechanisms. So as shown on the animated picture which will appear on the screens, Astrium Geoinformation Services has already worked with a Brazilian NGO to monitor the advancement of deforestation in Mato Grosso over the 25 last years. So what you see here, it is the Mato Grosso state. It is about twice as big as France. And what you see with the pink and the yellow colors, it is the advancement of degradation first and after deforestation of the Mato Grosso forest, which is just the southern part of the Amazonian forest. So it is quite impressive to see in the 25 years how the forest has been attacked and degraded. A second picture, and here maybe just before showing the second picture, for this global scale, Sentinel-2, which hopefully will be operational in 2014, will deliver a breakthrough in our capacity to monitor large global areas thanks to its multispectral capacity. So here, this second slide, it is about a part of the Mato Grosso state, the Sinop region, which is exposed to high pressure of deforestation, of agriculture on the forest. You have here a spot 5 imagery, which is a smaller imagery, and you see so a focus on a more smaller zone. And on slide 3, it is a part of the spot 5 image, but it's a much smaller area because it's just 5 kilometers on 5 kilometers. And what you see with data processing and retreatment, you are able on this very localized area to see the beginning of deforestation, even though it is supposed to be a reserve, which is supposed to be protected from deforestation. So that's what you see on the green picture, where you have the forest, which is now currently attacked by deforestation. And what I wanted to say there is that you have a very good complementarity between large-scale images and more focused images as the one delivered by SPOT. So we are now, Astrium, we are now a partner of the French Development Agency for the monitoring of the Congo forest. A similar approach is promoted by our German colleagues, together with the German Agency for International Cooperation, to monitor the southern African region. Optical and radar satellites, such as SPOT and TerraSARIX today, Pléiades tomorrow, are fully complementary. They allow an establishment of a more localized forest monitoring using reactive imagery to challenge deforestation and forest degradation. My message is clear. If REDD will become a component of the future climate change service, industry would be able to deliver the requested space-based information. A third example of what industry can deliver there, adaptation to climate change, would be enhanced if the future climate change service encompassed vulnerability scenarios as one of its components at national or regional levels. Europe has a strong added value by providing member states with products and analysis to each of them they could not trigger alone. Here also, industry as a whole in delivering information and analysis to help public authorities to take sound management decisions. As a conclusion, I would like to highlight the fact that already today, 2/3 of the essential climate variable, ECV, can be monitored through space assets. Thanks to continuous investment, Europe is a world leader in space for environment. The financial crisis should not endanger this leadership, which requires A, GMES to become fully operational under EU funding after 2014, and B, hopefully new missions such as JASON-CS dedicated to oceans or Sentinel-5 dedicated to atmosphere to be adopted by the next ESA Conference Ministerial in 2012. Space for environment, Astrium is ready to be a partner of this shared ambition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, all the speakers, because I see we are just in time for half an hour Q&A. If anyone has a question, you can put it here for us. Please identify yourself and explain to us to who the question is addressed. But first of all, I would like to pick in on what Mr. Israel said at the end of his speech about the impact of the financial crisis. I heard some fears about the future of GMES, and I would like to ask to everybody behind the table what their feelings are in this. And first of all, I would like to start with Mr. Boris. Mr. Boris. Alain Boris. Non, il est là. Il est où? C'est Boris. Ah oui, ok. Oui, excusez-moi.
Sorry.
Excusez-moi.
Yes, of course, the more important point for the future of space activity is the sustainability. And as all GMES and other programs are on support of European policies, it seems normal and it's of utmost importance that the sustainability is guaranteed because no policy will be able to be deployed without this sustainability, especially with the time frame that the space program needs to be deployed.
Yes. I think I could try to summarize in a very few words for GMES. It's time for consistency and benefits. And if we don't take that chance, to quote Winston Churchill, it will be time for consequences. We'll lose our investment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, for ESA, the situation is the following. We will have to decide in 12 months whether we launch the satellites. They are ready, more or less. And this we can only do when we know there is an operational budget. Because otherwise, we have 1 year operational budget from inside the Commission's budget, but nothing after secured. So if this is not the case, what do? Either we put the satellites in our storage, the most modern satellites of this planet for environmental observation, or we put them in orbit, and after 1 year we have to deorbit them, because this is the international rules we have to avoid space debris. This is the situation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Delamarre, you have a reply?
Yes, thank you. What we appreciate very much is that in recent times now more and more attention is being given to what can be the benefits of the services, also in terms of contribution to the community and contribution to industry, because we believe strongly that with some of the new instruments that will be up there, and especially the combination of various data, totally new services can be set up which can generate new businesses for industry, for citizens, and these returns by far, I believe, will cover the cost we are discussing. So we have to get a little bit away from this technology-driven discussions, from funding-driven discussions, towards business-driven discussions. Thank you. I just want to come back to Mr. Liebig. At the beginning, he has explained that we suffered this weekend a big event in the south of France. As you know, Thales Alenia Space is in Cannes, and we have suffered this kind of big event, extreme event, I would say. And the problem is not to know where is the water, because the people who are in the water could say, we know, we have the water at the knee today. But the problem is to know when the water will leave. And the main problem for that is that you need to define simulation and forecasting. And to do simulation and forecasting, you need to have long-term data and to assimilate data to the model. So it's very important to do this kind of continuity of data, modeling, assimilation of data, continuity of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, the room, I do not see questions for the moment. Everybody has...
Can I add just a few words on GMES in MFF? First, if I may, I would like to thank the European Commission, because thanks to this proposal, we are now speaking about GMES more and more. So there is a huge buzz, I must say, around GMES, and I don't say it is the first time, but there is, I think, and to a certain extent, I think it has been triggered by the 29 of June proposal. I would like to insist on 2 points. First, this program is already delivering. So honestly, it is now we are the harvest, if you want, in terms of services, is now happening. It will happen more and more. So honestly, it would be a pure nonsense to interrupt it now. And second, and here I would like to insist on this point, this program is not a risky technological program. And I know and I understand here the European Commission, which is afraid of large-scale programs and the technological risk they bear. GMES is now entering its operational phase, so we are not in a risky situation. We can avoid any other cost, and so I think it is a very strong additional reason to have it under the leadership of EC. And the last point is, thanks to an infrastructure which has been partly paid by ESA member states, now all EC members, all European members, will have access to GMES services and data. And this is a third reason why I think it should go back into EU budget soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions in the room? Yes?
That works. A question, I guess, for Mr. Liebig, but we have industry here too. People have talked about that they want GMES back in the multi-year financial framework, and I understand that. And Mr. Liebig has even talked about having to deorbit the satellites if they're not put back. Of course, they might be sold, as a lot of bankrupt assets are, by somebody who wants to bid for them after that. But leaving that aside just for the moment, my question is, there's been no discussion here today so far that I've heard about reducing the financial weight on the multi-annual financial framework of GMES. it would seem to me that some compromise might be available by reducing the 850 million euros or whatever it is, 860 per year for 7 years, to some lower amount. Is that not even on the table? Is everybody agreed that it's 860 million euros a year and not a penny less? Is that possible?
I think the question was for Libby. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the 834 million which are on the table is a budget which has been agreed, by the way, between the Commission, the Member States and the other players, the users, which would be necessary to support everything we have in mind and we have started. That includes the recurrent satellites, which still have to come. This includes the services, and this includes the in situ networks. Only part of that is for the space part, just to be quite clear for that. Well, we are all living in a real world and not in a world where we have all our wishes coming true. But it's absolutely clear if the budgets are reduced and then we can do less. I mean, ESA, I think, is able to help on one side, but only on this side, which is R&D. We have both in Galileo and in GMES some areas of R&D foreseen. In our convention, R&D is the activity of ESA and not the activity of the European Union. And we are ready to make proposals to keep some money free in both programs on this side. For the rest, I don't see an alternative except to de-scope what we have planned. And I think an operational system needs to have a certain sustainability for a couple of years. And for that we need, for example, the recurrent satellites, which are planned to be built now in order to be ready, similar to the EUMETSAT model after 7 years or so. So this is the situation.
Anybody would like to begin from the panel? No? Other questions? Yes?
Yes, I have a question concerning the governance of GMS.
Could you identify yourself, please?
We know that Sentinel-3 and 4 will be managed by EUMETSAT partially, but for the other, Sentinel-1 and 2, what will be the governance for the satellites? What will be the pilot of the system?
Could you identify yourself and
I am Théo Pirard, journalist for Wallonie Espace Info.
And the question is for?
What?
The question is for? For ESA?
No, I am not working for ESA, no.
No.
For ESA, the question is for ESA and, of course, for anybody of the panel.
Okay, the question is what is with Sentinel-1 and 2? I would not like to start with the satellites, because we have heard today a couple of times we speak about services, not about satellites. We need satellites, but not only satellites. So let's speak about the land services. And for the land services, we have one identified leader, which is the European Environmental Agency. So Jackie had to leave, so I speak also of her. We have an established user community. Sentinel-1 and 2 delivered especially to these communities. And what is open at the moment is who will be the final operator of that. ESA has said we be the interim operator, but this is only the operational part. So I don't think this is a very important issue. The important issue is more who will finally really steer the services and bring forward the services. And here we have some identifications for the more maritime part, because it's a bit an overlap, especially in radar. We have the European Maritime Safety Agency, which is also addressed, especially when it comes to CleanSeaNet and ship detection issues, very important services of GMES. And so from this side, I think everything is prepared. And who operates these satellites, I think this is a side issue. But as I said, we are ready to do that. We have done that 10 years for EUMETSAT, before EUMETSAT was founded, by the way. So it's not a big issue. It's 4 satellites more out of maybe 20 we have in this time frame to operate anyway.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Then I have another question, maybe as well for Mr. Liebig. What do you think about sharing data and international cooperation? Because we see more and more China, India, others are coming up. What do you think about the international cooperation?
Well, it's not secret that it's not a secret that ESA for the Sentinel data, and I don't speak from the commercial data which we procure for the European Commission to feed them into the services, because they have their own data policies we have to follow. So for the Sentinel data, I think we have to do what we have always done, and this leads me to international cooperation. We have to make an open and free data policy, because we speak about environmental data. I was myself one in a UN conference when some countries stepped up and said, your data are all confidential, so we don't trust you, we will not use it, and you cheat anyway. So this is one of the important issues, that these data are free and open. By the way, this also creates a lot of business downstream. And I would expect, and in many countries of this world it is like that, starting with the United States, who follows this data policy since many, many years, and you see that a lot of good activities have started there. I would expect the same from other countries, international. You mentioned China. I would add India, Brazil, Russia. These are all countries who are coming up and develop own capabilities. And I think we set a good precedence with that. Europe would go in the lead with GMES and also this type of data policy. But we have a very broad capability for international cooperation by that. And we should use this. It's a political instrument too. There are people who speak about GMES for Africa, because each satellite flying over Europe flies also over Africa. So there is no reason not to extend it the moment we have the infrastructure. Asia, huge areas where data are needed. So there is, I think this is a wonderful instrument for international cooperation in the future.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yes?
Just a few words on that topic. It's clear that for international cooperation or for scientific purpose, the free access data is the rule, definitely, because you could not go on the other way. But for sure, you could not create at the EU, at the Commission or ESA, being a competitor of some company like SpotImage or some other company. So it's raised a big problem, and this needs to be solved for, let's say, as soon as you go in the commercial market, you could not have the competitor coming directly from the people like ESA or EU.
Mr. Schäfer, and then Mr. Isa.
Yes, I think we, of course, agree with you. I said we supported free data, and but most of the data we're concerned with in this session is environmental data of broad swath data, continuous data for where there are no commercial competitors. Where there is a commercial competitor, obviously, ESA and the EC shouldn't get involved. They should just buy the data from the commercial company, at whatever rate it costs.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Because ESA was directly addressed, I have to say that I don't see any conflict here. You mentioned SpotImage, so with SpotImage I cannot see at all a conflict, but it's nice that you care for SpotImage. Because we have carefully chosen the resolution of the satellite. So in the optical area, for example, we have 10 meters in order to have a coverage of Europe with 2 satellites every 5 days, which is necessary to have cloud-free, complete mosaic of Europe. Spot is working with 2.5 meters. so the resolution is much higher, and the classical commercial market at the moment is below 2 meters. Yeah? And if you look into Pléiades, the dual-use system, this goes even to higher resolution. So we have carefully looked into not overlapping. And almost 80–90% of the data coming from the Sentinels are equivalent to Envisar data, which have been traditionally for free. And I would also like to remind you that there is, at least for one of our satellites, Sentinel-2, again the optical images, there is a competitor, if you want, with Landsat, who has, with a short exception of a couple of years, since more than 30 years, an open and free data policy with similar resolutions. And Landsat has lived through a period when it was sold and the utilization went down to less than 10%. So this is why this segment is open and free, and I don't see a conflict. There is a very intelligent, as I find, memo of EARTH, the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies, who make value adding, because they profit extremely from that they can offer services where the real value is created based on data which are free and open, and these are services which they can then let compete against conventional services to have a better price. So here is the real business.
Mr. Israel.
Yes, on this, on data, I would like to say 3 points. First, as other service providers, we are waiting for Sentinel, for instance, Sentinel-2 for agriculture, because it will be a new source of data which will be very helpful for us in the service we are going to offer. Second point, what is really important to have in mind is, exactly as said by Mr. Liebig, is the fact that it is not the same resolution, but we absolutely need to have a budget to buy the data from European contributing missions, be it data belonging to SPOT or to EGEOS or to other operators. You know that today GMES requests a lot of data from the contributing mission. There is a budget. This budget is absolutely key for the economical equilibrium of these companies. And if you don't have no more budget after 2014, it will endanger the whole economical efficiency, if you want, of many companies such as GEO and other companies. So yes, we think there is no direct competition between the data, but we absolutely need to have a budget for the contributing missions. And after, maybe what can be seen will be Sentinel second generation, a different resolution, and here you could have a conflict, which is not the case with the first generation.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Delama.
Yes, I think this is getting an interesting discussion, and maybe I can contribute by giving some examples from the telecoms industry. As you know, in the early days of telecommunications, it was the key asset was to have the cable and to own the cable and to make sure that you are the only ones that can transport the data, and that was where you made the money. As we know, it was impossible for a single company to build a global network reaching out to every city, every citizen. So today networks are based on a combination of networks, and you, as a telecoms company, we hardly make any money on transporting the data, as most of it is going over the internet, which is a public resource in the view of the user. So I think some of the mechanisms that we have seen in telecoms industry may certainly be applied to space data, and where we believe the real value is, I think some of the speakers have underlined it, is how you then present the data and how you provide an application around it to a particular user segment. As we have seen in the telecoms industry, what is happening to portals. The business is with the portals, and the portals are so manifold you cannot dream even of what can happen maybe to this GMES services in future. We have seen already from the ideas competition how manifold these ideas could be. Of course, some of these models need to be developed, need to be proven with real-life users.
but we believe there is a really great future, and we just simply have to see that these business models get developed from a transport or a data-related business into a value business, into a portal business.
Thank you very much. I do not see any question anymore in the... Yes.
Yes, Jacques Audric from European Space Agency. We have noticed this morning that on the contrary of GMES, apparently there was today no real bad news for the budget of Galileo. Of course, everybody will have understood that it's related to the successful launch, recent successful launch. But I think also, apparently there is an agreement and no protest about what Galileo could bring back in terms of money. I heard the figure of 60 billion, which is far, far beyond the expenses for Galileo. And I'm sure it's a very convincing argument for all, let's say, people having some power of the European budget or state budget, which is involved. On the GMES, I heard very convincing arguments that we have already invested a lot, and I think, for instance, Director Volker Liebig mentioned in very clear terms what would happen if we lost this investment, what would it mean practically in terms of satellite launches. But I wonder, do we have some elements to put figures? I mean, GMES, economically speaking, I see one of the interests I see, for instance, is that all catastrophic natural events like the recent tsunami or floods or whatever cost to society hundreds of millions and often billions of euros or dollars. I've not heard so much what we could say, but really in terms of figures, for instance, if we manage to forecast even partially some kind of events, what it would bring. And I think I have the feeling that if we have some figures like that, and maybe some people have, that could be a very convincing element for the people who provide this, who are hesitating on this budget of 5.8 million to give to GMES. So my question is, do we have some elements to put in terms of figures really there? Thank you.
C'est qui doit répondre à cette question?
So who would like to answer that question?
Has some elements, if possible, maybe Volker Liebig, I don't know, that would be my pleasure to hear you, Volker.
Alors, Isa peut répondre à Isa.
Well, there is a macroeconomic benefit study, of course, as for Galileo, so we have it for GMES. We started it with the same logic, and so all these numbers are available and have been since long in the system. So it's also clear that 90% of the macroeconomic benefits comes from climate change side, so is in environment. To give you only one figure out of all this, the proper prediction of flooding saves in Europe every year 800 million. Only this sector. The damages are 4 billion per year. But when you can forecast them properly, which was, by the way, the case for the last storm, and the civil protection authorities were well prepared, different from New Orleans, for example, then the damages are much less than in a case where you are unprepared.
Monsieur Bourri.
Yes, I think we have some figures as industry, perhaps Stéphane has some, but I just wanted to point out the fact that it's not, of course, to have figures is good to convince people, but I think everybody is convinced. The Commission has just proposed that this is the member states which will fund GMES. After, you can argue what is the most efficient. Is it the member states or is it the Commission? But there is no question of the fact that GMES has a large impact on society. Whereas for Galileo, it is a legal subject. Galileo is an infrastructure of the EU, which is not the case of GMES. So as an infrastructure of the EU can choose to stop it, of course, or to continue, but it's a question for the EU. It's not the same level.
So, thank you very much, everybody. I have heard that Mark has some practical communications, important communications to address to you.
Oui. Si vous me permettez, 4 petits points. Je commence.
Just 4 points. First of all, one practical point, and a nice one. Well, the badge you received today is only valid today for security reasons, so terribly sorry about that. Tomorrow you'll have to ask for a new badge. That's the law of this institution. Now, what we've heard is that our discussions have been very well received here and in the Commission. Even though not all the members of Parliament or their assistants are here, the debates have been recorded and are being broadcast. And so people that are attending other meetings can catch up and listen to the debate. So everybody says it's very good. Then a third point and a practical point, you're all invited to the dinner offered by the Committee of the Regions. So after the final session, the hostesses will tell you how to get there. It's not very far. And now I suggest we have a short coffee break.
I apologize. I didn't show you. Sorry. Completely my orientation.
Well done. Premier exercice pour vous.
Education hat, das willst du ja wissen, oder? Das ist nebst dem Professional Career ist das enorm wichtig. Oder man mischt die zwei Sachen zusammen. Nein. Nein. Und die Ruhe schon da fahren. Ja. Alle ist noch richtig führen im Militär. Vielleicht müssen wir das da runter tun und hier müssen wir schreiben 700 Jahre in Angola oder so. Du, ich lasse jetzt einfach mal so. Ja, du, das ist gut. Nein, ich kann das Gelegenheit sehen, aber der Drama habe ich natürlich auch schon gesehen, vor allem Drama, der Space Conference, das ist eigentlich immer so eine schöne Sache, schöne Beziehung, wieso ist eigentlich? Ich habe nicht geguckt. Ja. Und da hat er quasi so die Funktion gehabt von, also wie ist der Name, wie heißt der Name vom Schriftsteller? Plus. So ist das das Gleiche. Also, das wäre doch insbesondere, wenn wir also Themen haben wie NTG, ja, warte mal, du. Das kommt sehr schnell jetzt.
Madame, j'essaie